Welcome back, everyone, to The Deep Dive.
Mm.
Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the world of eating disorders,
Yeah.
but through a lens that you might not expect, the 12 links of dependent origination.
Interesting.
Now, I know
Yeah.
when you hear the 12 links, you might be thinking Buddhism, and you'd be right.
Right.
It is a concept that comes from Buddhist thought,
Mm.
but you don't need to be a Buddhist to get a lot out of this.
Absolutely.
Because at its core, it's really about understanding cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when we're talking about suffering, in this case, the suffering that's tied to eating disorders, like how does that arise?
Yeah.
What are the steps? What are the links in that chain?
Yeah.
And most importantly, once we see those links, can we find places to interrupt that cycle?
Yeah. That's the key, isn't it?
Right.
Like understanding that there is a cycle. It's not just random.
Yeah, absolutely. So for someone listening who's, maybe in the thick of it themselves, struggling with an eating disorder, or maybe they know someone who is, how would you explain these 12 links? Like, what's the big picture here?
I think a good way to think about it is like a chain reaction. So each link is a stage in the process of how suffering, specifically the suffering related to eating disorders, arises.
Okay.
So we start with the first link, which is called ignorance.
Ignorance.
And I know that word can sound
Yeah, a little harsh.
a little bit harsh. It's not about being stupid. It's really about not seeing clearly.
Okay.
It's about a kind of blindness, to our true nature
I like that.
and to the nature of reality.
It's like we're looking through a distorted lens, and that's what sets the whole thing in motion.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got this ignorance, this lack of clarity on seeing what's the next domino to fall in this chain.
Well, from that ignorance spring up what we call mental formations.
Mental formation.
So you can think of these as all the thought patterns and habits that we develop, like those mental tapes that just play on repeat in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to eating disorders, these can be things like constant self-criticism
Okay. Yeah.
that need to be perfect.
That need to be perfect, right?
The obsession with food and weight.
Yeah, it takes over.
They become pretty dominant.
Dominant and exhausting.
Yeah.
It's like they have a life of their own.
Absolutely.
So we've got the ignorance, and that feeds into these often negative mental formations. Where does our consciousness fit into all of this? Because clearly it's playing a role.
Right. Well, think of consciousness like a spotlight.
Okay.
And in someone with an eating disorder, that spotlight gets really, really fixated on a few very specific things.
Okay.
The body, food, calories, whatever the eating disorder latches onto, and everything else just kind of fades into the background.
So it's like tunnel vision?
Yeah, exactly.
Tunnel vision.
We're not seeing the whole picture anymore, just this narrow, distorted view. Yeah, and it's filtering everything through the lens of the eating disorder.
And it's starting to feel a bit claustrophobic just talking about it, to be honest.
I know, it's intense, right?
Yeah.
Because those first 3 links are really powerful. But it gets, I guess, even stickier when we get to link number 4, which is name and form.
Name and form.
Basically, this is where all those thoughts and feelings that we've been talking about, they start to solidify into our sense of self.
Okay.
We start labeling ourselves, I'm fat, I'm a failure, I'm not good enough. And those labels just become so ingrained.
Yeah, like part of our identity.
Exactly. And it's not just thoughts anymore. It's who we believe we are.
That's a gut punch for sure.
Yeah.
Because it makes it so much harder to break free.
Absolutely.
When you believe that about yourself.
Yeah.
It makes me think, we're talking about these thoughts and feelings, and, these days especially, it feels like everywhere we turn, there's something triggering those things, those insecurities.
Yeah, everywhere you look.
Is that where the next link, Sixth Sense Basis, comes in?
It is. Our senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, they're constantly taking in information.
Yeah.
Remember that distorted lens we talked about?
Right.
Well, now it's influencing how we see everything.
Mm-hmm.
So the number on the scale, the way clothes fit, images on social media, it all gets amplified and distorted to fit the narrative of the eating disorder.
Oh, for sure. So it's like our senses, in a way, become weapons used against us.
Yeah.
And we're taking in all of this distorted information, and then, bam, we hit link 6. Contact.
Yeah. And that's that moment, right? That split second when our senses meet a stimulus. Whether it's a picture, a comment, whatever it might be. What's happening in that split second?
Yeah, that is the moment, because all of those ingrained mental formations, all of this self-criticism, the fear, the inadequacy, they get triggered.
Like a lightning strike. Yeah, it's like a lightning strike hitting dry kindling, It just sets off this whole cascade of painful thoughts and emotions.
And that's where things can spiral pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
Okay, it's making so much more sense now.
Yeah.
The eating disorder is not just about food. It's a whole web of interconnected causes and conditions. We're not just hungry. We're hurting.
Oh.
Which I guess is a perfect segue to the next link. Feeling, right?
Yeah, that's right. Feeling, or Vinnana in Buddhist terms, refers to, I guess, the emotional tone of an experience.
Okay.
So pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And in the case of eating disorders, those feelings tend to be pretty intense.
Yeah, they are.
And mostly unpleasant.
Mostly unpleasant, yeah.
We're talking shame, guilt, anxiety.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And it's not just those individual feelings, it's how they sort of feed each other, right? So we feel bad about ourselves, and then we engage in those behaviors, whether it's restricting food, binging, purging.
Exactly.
And then that makes us feel even worse, so it's like a vicious cycle.
A vicious cycle. Exactly.
So how do we even begin to untangle this mess?
Well, that's where I think we start to see the power of understanding these links. Because once we see how they're all connected, we can start looking for those places where we can intervene, you know, those points of leverage. And the next link, craving, is a big one.
Craving. Okay, that's interesting, because when people think about eating disorders, often they think about, cravings for food.
Right.
But it sounds like you're talking about something much deeper.
Yeah, it goes way beyond just the food itself. It's really about a desire for control, a desire for escape, a desire for relief from all those painful feelings that we were just talking about.
It's a coping mechanism.
It is. It's that urge to cling to anything that promises, even for a moment, some peace.
Yeah.
Or some sense of being in control.
So for someone who's really struggling, the food, the rituals, the behaviors, however unhealthy they might be, they become a way to cope.
Exactly. It's a desperate attempt to feel okay when everything else feels out of control.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So it's not as simple as just saying, just eat or stop purging.
Right.
Because you have to address that underlying craving, that need.
Yeah, you have to get to the root of it.
It's so much more nuanced
It is.
than I think a lot of people realize.
Yeah.
So we've got this craving, this intense desire for relief. What's the next link in the chain? What happens next?
That craving, then, it intensifies and turns into clinging.
Clinging, okay.
It's like we grab onto these things,
Okay.
the food rules, the rituals, that number on the scale.
Yeah.
And we just hold on for dear life because we think it's keeping us safe.
So change feels terrifying.
It does. It can feel like drowning.
If that's what's keeping you afloat.
Yeah, exactly. But here's the paradox, right?
Yeah.
The things we're clinging to so tightly,
Yeah.
they're not actually keeping us safe.
Right.
They're keeping us trapped.
They are.
And that's what the next link, becoming, is all about.
Becoming. Okay.
It's the momentum of that cycle.
Okay.
We keep clinging, we keep engaging in those behaviors.
Yeah.
And it's like we're digging ourselves deeper and deeper into this hole.
Deeper into the hole.
Yeah, and with each time we give in to that craving, we cling even tighter.
Yeah, so it's like we're reinforcing those neural pathways in a way.
Exactly.
So if we're becoming more entrenched in the eating disorder, is there any hope? Can we break free at this point?
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of the 12 links. It shows us that even though this process can feel so inevitable, like it's just going to happen.
Right, like you're destined.
Yeah, it's our destiny.
Yeah.
It's not true.
Okay.
There's always a possibility for change. And that's where the next link, birth, comes in.
Birth.
Oh.
I'm not sure I follow. What do you mean by birth in the context of an eating disorder?
Remember how we talked about name and form?
Yeah.
And how we create this identity based on all of those negative thoughts and feelings?
Right.
Well, birth is about the arising of that identity. It's like the eating disorder becomes this entity separate from our true self.
Oh, wow.
It takes on a life of its own.
So it's not that we have an eating disorder, it's that the eating disorder becomes us.
It becomes us.
That's pretty scary.
It is scary, but it's also empowering. Because if we can understand how that identity was born, we can also understand how to let it go.
Okay, I like that. So there's a glimmer of hope here.
Yeah.
But we still have 2 links left.
Yeah.
And the next one, I have to admit, sounds a bit ominous. Aging and death.
I know, right?
Aging and death. Come on.
No, it sounds heavy.
Yeah, a little bit, maybe more than a little bit. How does that apply to an eating disorder?
Well, aging and death in this context, it's not about literal death. It's about impermanence.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that everything changes.
Cool.
Everything is in constant flux, even the things that feel the most permanent, like our thoughts and feelings.
So even though the eating disorder feels like it's always going to be a part of me, like it's, I don't know, woven into my DNA.
Yeah. It's not. Nothing is fixed. Nothing is permanent.
So it can change.
It can change, and that's actually incredibly liberating.
Because if it can arise, it can also cease.
Exactly.
If it can be born, it can also, in a way, die. That means that healing is possible.
Absolutely. The death in this case is a transformation.
Okay.
The death of that eating disorder self makes space for something new to be born.
Okay, that is a lot to process. I'm going to need a minute to wrap my head around all of that.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is a lot, but thank you for walking us through that. It's like we've been mapping out the whole terrain of an eating disorder, all the valleys and peaks and everything in between.
Yeah, it's complex.
It is complex, but knowing the landscape doesn't necessarily tell us how to navigate it, right?
Right.
So that's what I want to talk about next. What are those points of intervention? What are the practical steps we can take to start breaking free?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
And there's no easy answer.
No, there's not. But I think one of the things that we've been talking about is like this idea of consciousness being like a spotlight, right?
Yeah.
So is it as simple as like redirecting that spotlight? Like instead of shining it on all of the things that are fueling the eating disorder,
Right.
can we shine it on the things that are going to help us heal?
Absolutely. I think that's one of those powerful things we can do.
Okay, so like be more mindful of those things. But give me some specifics because I think that's where people get stuck.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
It's like, okay, I get it. Be mindful. But mindful of what? What do I focus on instead of my perceived flaws or the number on the scale or what everybody else is eating?
Right. Well, I think it starts with like shifting your attention to your strengths.
Okay.
Your values, the things that make you uniquely you, that have nothing to do with your body or your weight or what you ate today.
So it's like we're reclaiming our identity piece by piece.
Exactly.
But how do you actually do that? Because some days that negative voice is just so loud.
Yeah, it can be really overwhelming, right?
It's so persistent. I can't seem to shut it up.
Well, and this is where I think, mindfulness practices come in.
Okay, yeah, here we go.
I know, you've probably heard it a million times, but there's a reason why people keep talking about it.
It works?
It works because it helps us cultivate that awareness, that ability to observe our thoughts and feelings without judgment.
So it's like hitting the pause button on that mental tape that's always playing.
Exactly.
But how does that actually help us break free from an eating disorder?
Well, let's say, for example, you're having a really strong urge to binge.
Okay.
Instead of just automatically giving in, you pause, you take a breath, and you just notice that urge. You might notice the physical sensations, like your stomach is growling, maybe your heart is racing.
Okay.
You notice the thoughts, I need this, I deserve this, I can't stand feeling this way.
Okay.
But instead of getting swept away by all of that, you just acknowledge it. Oh, there's that urge again.
So we're not fighting it, we're not judging it, we're just noticing it.
Exactly.
And then what?
And you ask yourself, what do I truly need in this moment?
Okay.
It might be food, but more often than not, it's something else.
It's something deeper.
It's connection, it's comfort, it's a way to release stress or process emotions.
So it's about getting curious.
Yeah.
About looking beneath the surface to see what's really going on.
Exactly.
I love that. And it makes me think about self-compassion because I think that's something we don't talk about enough when it comes to eating disorders.
Totally.
It's almost like self-criticism is like part of the disease.
It's a huge part of it. Eating disorders thrive on shame and guilt.
Right.
But self-compassion is the antidote to that.
Okay.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding that we would offer to a good friend who's struggling.
So instead of beating ourselves up for having those urges, for making mistakes, for not being perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
We can offer ourselves a little grace.
Yeah. A little grace, yeah, because let's be real, none of us are perfect.
Not even close. And, I think one of the most challenging things about eating disorders is that they can really distort our sense of self. It's like we get so caught up in the food, the weight, the body image that we lose sight of who we are beneath all of that.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to really connect with your values, the things that are truly meaningful to you.
Okay, so what are some examples of values?
Sure. So values can be things like authenticity, creativity, connection, compassion, adventure, growth, spirituality, really anything that resonates with you on a deep level.
With those things that like light you up, that make you feel alive.
Exactly. And then asking yourself, like, how can I live a life that reflects these values?
That's great.
Yeah.
And you might find that some of your behaviors are actually in conflict with your values.
Totally.
You know, like maybe you value connection, but you're isolating yourself because of your eating disorder.
Yeah. Yeah, or maybe you value creativity, but you've completely stopped pursuing your passions because you're so consumed by thoughts about food and weight.
So the eating disorder is actually preventing you from living a life that's true to yourself.
Exactly.
Oof, that's a tough one.
Yeah, it can be a really hard realization.
It is. It is. But so how do you bridge that gap? How do you start making choices that are more in line with your values?
Well, it starts with small steps.
Okay.
You know, it might be reaching out to a friend. It might be spending 10 minutes doing something you enjoy.
Right.
It might be choosing to eat a meal that nourishes your body instead of restricting or binging. It doesn't have to be this huge sweeping change.
It's those little course corrections that over time can lead you in a whole new direction.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
And as you start making those choices, as you start to align your actions with your values, you'll start to feel a sense of empowerment, you know?
Okay.
You start to see that you have a choice.
Yeah.
You're not just a victim of your eating disorder.
I love that.
Yeah.
You're reclaiming your power.
Yeah, exactly. You're reclaiming your agency, your ability to choose how you want to live.
And that's what I think makes this whole conversation about the 12 links so hopeful.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding the problem. It's about seeing that there's a way out.
Absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination, right?
Right.
There will be ups and downs. There will be moments when you feel lost and discouraged.
Oh, yeah.
But the key is to keep coming back to these core principles: awareness, compassion, and action.
Okay, so awareness of those thoughts and feelings, compassion for ourselves, and the struggles that we're facing, and then action that's aligned with our values.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, and remember, you know, you don't have to do this alone.
Right.
There are so many resources available to help you on this journey: therapists, support groups, online communities.
So reach out.
Yeah.
Connect. Ask for help.
Don't suffer in silence.
This has been such an insightful conversation. But before we wrap up, you know, we've been talking a lot about individual healing. But eating disorders aren't just an individual problem, right?
No, absolutely not.
Like, there's this whole cultural context that contributes to them.
Yeah.
Where does that fit into the 12 links?
That's such a good question. And I think the answer is it's woven into every single link.
Right.
Remember that first link we talked about, ignorance?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that ignorance is culturally conditioned.
Right.
You know, we're bombarded with messages about what we should look like, what we should eat, how we should behave.
It's like we're all swimming in a sea of diet culture.
Totally.
And it's hard to even see it because it's just all around us.
Yeah, it's the water we swim in.
And those cultural messages get internalized. They become those negative mental formations.
Exactly.
That we were talking about earlier.
They shape how we see ourselves.
Yeah.
How we relate to food, how we interact with the world.
So it's not just about changing our own thoughts and behaviors. It's about changing the culture. About challenging those harmful norms.
Absolutely.
And creating a world that's more accepting and inclusive.
Yeah, a world where everyone feels seen, valued, worthy, regardless of their size or shape.
And that's a vision worth fighting for.
It is.
And that fight starts within each of us.
Yeah.
Right? By healing our own relationship with food and our bodies.
We contribute to a collective shift towards a more just and compassionate world.
Okay, we've talked about the problem. We've explored the causes.
Yeah.
We've even touched on some solutions. But I want to make sure that we end this conversation on a note of hope, on a note of possibility.
Yeah.
So for someone who's listening right now and they're feeling lost, overwhelmed, they don't even know where to start, what's one small step that they can take today to start moving towards healing, towards liberation?
That's such a good question.
That's a big question.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the most important thing is to remember that you're not alone in this. You know, there are people who care about you, people who want to help you, and there are resources available to support you on this journey.
So reach out.
Reach out.
Connect. Ask for help.
Don't try to do this by yourself.
Yeah.
And in terms of, like, concrete steps, one thing you can do is just start paying attention. Notice those moments when you're triggered, when those negative thoughts and urges arise.
Okay.
Don't judge yourself. Just observe.
Like we were talking about earlier, hit the pause button.
Exactly.
Create some space, get curious.
Exactly. And from that place of awareness, you can start to make different choices.
Okay.
Choose kindness over criticism.
Yeah.
Choose nourishment over punishment. Choose connection over isolation.
Those are powerful words, and I think they really encapsulate what we've been talking about today.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming our power, reclaiming our choice, our freedom.
Exactly.
And remembering that healing is possible.
Yeah.
It might not be easy, it might take time, but it's worth it.
It's so worth it.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
And I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to explore, so much more to learn.
Absolutely. The 12 links are, such a rich framework.
Yeah.
And they offer, I think, endless opportunities for growth and insight.
And that's what makes them so relevant to this conversation about eating disorders, because it's not just about finding a quick fix.
Right.
It's about embarking on this journey of self-discovery, of healing, of liberation.
It's a lifelong journey.
As we wrap up this deep dive, looking at eating disorders through this lens of the 12 links, it really strikes me how interconnected it all is.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, like how all these different aspects, thoughts, feelings, behaviors.
Even culture.
Yeah, even culture all kind of weaving together to create this web of, suffering, ultimately.
And yet I think within that complexity, there's also this sense of hope, because once we start to see those patterns, once we understand the links in the chain, we can start to say, okay, where can we intervene?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So for someone listening who's maybe feeling ready to, take that first step, start to maybe disentangle themselves from the grip of an eating disorder, what would you say to them? Where do they even begin?
Well, I think maybe a good place to start is just to reflect back on what we've talked about today and see which of those 12 links really resonates with them the most, with their experience.
Okay, so is it that feeling of ignorance? Like that distorted lens that they're looking through?
Right.
Or maybe it's those mental formations, those negative thoughts that just keep popping up.
Exactly. It could be any of them, really. I think the key is to kind of identify that point where they feel the most stuck.
Okay.
Where that cycle just seems to keep going.
Okay, so once they've, identified that point, what's the next step?
I think that's where the real work begins. It's about bringing awareness to that particular link,
Yeah.
and how it's impacting their thoughts, their feelings, their behaviors.
So, for instance, if it's clinging, maybe they start to notice, what are they holding on to so tightly?
Is it that number on the scale?
Yeah.
Is it a set of rigid food rules? Is it that need for validation from other people?
Yeah. And then it's okay, what would it look like to maybe loosen my grip on that a little bit?
Exactly.
What would it feel like to let go?
Even just a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just to experiment.
Yeah. And that's where those tools we talked about come in, right?
Exactly.
Like the mindfulness, the self-compassion, connecting with values.
Those are the things that can help us navigate those really, really tough moments and to make a different choice.
Right. To start to create new pathways in the brain.
Exactly. It's like rewiring our brains to lead to more freedom and well-being.
It's a process, though.
It's a process, not a quick fix. Yeah. There are going to be setbacks, there are going to be challenges, but the important thing is to just keep practicing.
Yeah. Keep coming back to it.
Keep experimenting, keep moving forward.
And remember that you're not alone.
Absolutely not.
There's a whole community of people who understand, who've been there, who can support you.
Yeah. Reaching out, connecting with others, sharing our stories. I think that's one of the most powerful antidotes to the shame.
The isolation.
Yeah. The isolation that so often comes with these struggles.
And speaking of community, I think it's important, as we kind of wrap up here, to acknowledge the role that culture plays in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can't just focus on individual healing without looking at those bigger systems.
The systemic issues, for sure.
Yeah, that contribute to these struggles.
Yeah, so challenging diet culture, promoting body positivity, advocating for more diverse representation, those are all really important.
Yeah, it's about creating a world where everyone feels seen and valued and worthy.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Regardless of their size or shape or their eating habits.
Exactly. And that's a vision, I think, worth striving for.
Oh, absolutely. Individually and collectively.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Healing is possible.
It is.
It might not be linear.
Yeah.
It might not be easy, but it's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely.
And every step we take towards healing ourselves is also a step towards healing the world.
So well said.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of eating disorders through the lens of the 12 links.
Yeah, this was great.
I hope it's given you some new insights, some helpful tools,
And a sense of hope.
and most importantly, a sense of hope and possibility. Until next time, keep diving deep.